The wind in Dayton doesn't just blow in November. It bites right through the siding of a house built in 1954. I sat at my kitchen table, my coat buttoned to my chin, watching my breath bloom like small ghosts in the dim afternoon light. The power had been out for 2 days. I'd called the utility company, but they said the account was flagged for non-payment. That was impossible. I'd worked 43 years at the AC Delco plant, never missed a bill, and always kept my ledger straight. My hands, gnarled by decades of tool and die work, and a touch of the Agent Orange I brought home from the Highlands, shook as I tried to strike a match. I needed to see the numbers on my wife Martha's insulin vial. It had to stay cold, but the fridge was a tomb. I'd spent my last $6 on a bag of ice from the gas station down the road, walking 3 miles round trip because my old Chevy's starter had finally given up the ghost. I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway. It wasn't the utility truck. It was a sleek silver BMW that looked like a surgical instrument against the gray Ohio sky. My son, David, stepped out. He didn't come inside immediately. He stood on the porch, checking his watch, looking at my peeling paint with a mixture of pity and disgust. When he finally walked in, he didn't hug me. He didn't ask why I was sitting in the dark. He just dropped a stack of papers on the table, right next to the melting ice and the insulin. "Dad, we talked about this," he said, his voice smooth and impatient, the way you'd talk to a child who keeps spilling his milk. "The house is a liability. You're living like a vagrant. I've found a place, the Willows. It's top tier, but I need you to sign these power of attorney forms so I can settle the utility misunderstanding and get the house listed." I looked at him, my only son, the boy I'd taught to throw a curveball in this very yard. He didn't see a father. He saw a hurdle. He saw a mortgage he wanted to liquidate. "David, I'm fine," I whispered, my pride sticking in my throat like a dry pill. "I just need a little help this month." He let out a sharp, jagged laugh and leaned in close. "You're not fine, Raymond. You're 79 and rotting. Sign the papers or I let the bank take it all, and you'll end up on the street with that flea-bitten dog." He pushed a pen toward my hand, and for the first time in my life, I felt the terrifying weight of being completely disposable. David left after I refused to sign, the tires of his BMW spitting gravel as he sped away. I sat there in the silence, the only sound being the rhythmic thump-thump of Buddy's tail against the linoleum. Buddy was a golden retriever mix, almost as old as I was in dog years, with a white muzzle and eyes that understood too much. He nudged my hand, sensing the cold radiating from my bones. I didn't have much left, but I had him. I stood up, my knees popping like dry twigs, and walked over to the pantry. There was half a jar of peanut butter and a sleeve of saltines. I took a spoonful of the peanut butter and gave it to Buddy. He needed the calories more than I did. I made do with the crackers and a glass of lukewarm tap water. The next morning, I hiked to the VA clinic. My hip was screaming, a reminder of a jump into the A-Shao Valley that hadn't gone as planned in 1968. The waiting room was a sea of gray hair and faded ball caps. We were the old guard, the men who built the country and then were politely asked to move to the back of the line. I waited 4 hours just to see a nurse. When I finally got to the window, I asked about my pension check. It hadn't hit my account. The girl behind the glass didn't even look up from her computer. "Mr. Carter, the records show a change in your primary representative," she said, her voice robotic. "All communications and disbursements are being routed through your legal guardian, David Carter. It says here you've been declared mentally non-capacitated for financial decisions." The blood rushed to my head, a hot, dizzying surge. Non-capacitated? I'm the one who fixed the machines that built the cars he drives. I'm the one who My voice cracked. The security guard, a young man who looked like he could bench press a truck, stepped closer. He didn't look mean, just bored. "Sir, you need to lower your voice or I'll have to escort you out." I looked at the girl, then at the guard, and then at my own shaking hands. I wasn't a hero anymore. I wasn't even a citizen. I was a case file. I turned around and walked out into the biting wind, realizing that David hadn't just come over to complain about the house. He had already started the process of erasing my existence. I reached into my pocket to feel the one thing he couldn't take, Martha's wedding ring, but my fingers met only empty fabric. Panic is a cold thing. I patted my pockets again, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Martha's ring. She'd worn it for 51 years, and after she passed, I'd kept it in my pocket every single day. It was my anchor. I must have dropped it when I was fumbling for my keys at the gas station, or perhaps it had slipped out during the long walk. I retraced my steps, eyes glued to the gray asphalt of the Dayton streets. People walked past me, looking through me as if I were a ghost. To them, I was just another old man looking for a lost nickel. I searched the gutter outside the Walmart, my vision blurring. I couldn't lose that ring. It was all that was left of the girl who had waited for me to come home from the war. I walked into the Walmart, hoping someone had turned it in. The air conditioning felt like a mockery of the cold outside. I approached the customer service desk. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said to the woman behind the counter. She was chewing gum and scrolling on her phone. "I lost a gold band, very simple, with MC to RC 1964 engraved inside. Has anyone—" She didn't even let me finish. "Nope, nothing like that. You should check the lost and found at the police station." She didn't even look at the logbook. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of my 79 years. I felt small. I felt invisible. I looked down at the floor and saw a shimmer near the vending machines. My heart leaped, but it was just a discarded candy wrapper. I couldn't go home empty-handed. I needed dog food. I walked to the pet aisle and looked at the prices. Everything had gone up. I counted the coins in my pocket: 3 quarters, 2 dimes, and 4 pennies. Not even enough for a small bag. I stood there, staring at the bright bags of kibbles and bits, and felt a tear finally track through the deep lines on my face. A young woman in a business suit walked past, her heels clicking sharply. She glanced at me, saw my sadness, and then looked away quickly, as if my sadness were contagious. I felt a deep, burning shame. I had served my country. I had worked until my back gave out, and here I was, crying over a bag of dog food I couldn't afford. As I walked out empty-handed, I saw a familiar silver BMW parked in the fire lane. David was inside, laughing at something on his phone. I didn't let him see me. I ducked behind a row of shopping carts, my pride more wounded than my pride was hungry. I watched him pull away, his mind likely miles away from the father he was trying to bury alive. I walked the 2 miles back to my house, the sky turning a bruised purple. When I rounded the corner to my street, my heart stopped. There was a large, bright red sign hammered into my front lawn. "For sale, by agent." Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "Estate liquidation." My house. The house I'd paid off in 1992. The house where Martha had died in my arms. David hadn't waited for my signature. He'd used that non-capacitated filing to bypass me entirely. I stormed onto the porch, my anger giving me a temporary warmth. I grabbed the sign and tried to pull it out, but my grip was weak. I kicked at it, a useless, pathetic gesture that only made my hip flare with white-hot pain. I fell to my knees in the dirt, gasping. Buddy came running to the screen door, barking frantically. "It's okay, boy. It's okay." I crawled to the door and let myself in. The house felt even colder now. It felt like it was already mourning us. I went to the kitchen and saw a note slid under the door. It was from the landlord of the small plot. I owned the house, but in this senior community, the land was leased. The note said I had 72 hours to vacate due to safety violations cited by my legal representative. David was moving fast. He wanted me out before I could find a way to fight back. I sat on the floor with Buddy, his head in my lap. "They think we're done, Buddy," I whispered. I looked around the kitchen. I saw my old toolbox in the corner, the one I'd kept from the plant. It was heavy, steel, and dented. I remembered what my foreman used to say. Raymond, you can fix anything if you have the right tool and enough patience. I wasn't just an old man. I was a tool and die maker. I knew how things were built, and I knew how they could be taken apart. I stood up, the fog in my brain clearing. If David wanted a fight, I'd give him one, but I wouldn't do it with words. I'd do it the way I survived the jungle. I went to the basement and pulled out a dusty olive-drab footlocker. Inside was a small handheld recorder I'd used to send tapes to Martha from Vietnam. I checked the batteries. They were dead, but the tapes were there. And then, the door kicked open.
It wasn't David. It was two men in dark uniforms. Raymond Carter? One of them asked. He was young, his face wiped clean of any emotion. We're from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report that you're living in unsafe conditions, no power, no food, and showing signs of self-neglect. Your son has authorized an emergency transport to a care facility for your own safety. I stood my ground, my hand resting on the footlocker. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. I've lived here 50 years. The second man sighed, a sound of practiced exhaustion. Sir, look around. It's freezing in here. You have no utilities. We're not here to argue. We have a court-ordered 72-hour observation hold. They didn't use handcuffs, but they might as well have. They took me by the elbows, their grip firm and unyielding. I looked back at Buddy, who was whining, his tail tucked between his legs. "What about my dog?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What about Buddy?" The first man didn't look back. Animal control has been notified. They'll be here shortly to pick him up. The word animal control hit me harder than a physical blow. To them, he was just a stray. To me, he was the last piece of my heart. I struggled, trying to pull away, but they were too strong. They led me out to a white van waiting at the curb. The neighbors were watching from behind their curtains. People I'd known for decades, people I'd mown lawns for and shared beers with. Now, they were just watching the crazy old man being taken away. As the van pulled away, I saw the animal control truck turning onto my street. Buddy's face was in the window, his paws pressing against the glass. I let out a cry, a sound I hadn't made since the day Martha died. I felt a hot, searing shame. I had survived firefights and factory layoffs, but I couldn't save my dog from my own son. They took me to The Willows, a brick building that smelled of bleach and industrial floor wax. They stripped me of my clothes and gave me a thin blue gown. They took my watch, my wallet, and my pride. As they locked the door to my small, sterile room, the nurse looked at me with a fake painted-on smile. "Don't worry, Mr. Carter, you're in good hands now." But as she turned to leave, I saw something glinting on her finger, a gold band with a simple engraving. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, my heart hammering. I knew that ring. I knew every scratch and every curve of it. I'd polished it for Martha every anniversary. I stood up and walked to the door, pounding on the small square of reinforced glass. "Hey, that ring! Where did you get that ring?" I shouted. But the hallway was empty, the fluorescent lights flickering with a hum that made my teeth ache. No one came. I was a difficult patient now, likely sedated if I made too much noise. I forced myself to sit back down and breathe. I had to be smart. If I acted like a madman, they'd keep me here forever. The next morning, David visited. He looked smug, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first 3 cars combined. He sat in the plastic chair, crossing his legs. "See, Dad? This isn't so bad. You've got heat, you've got 3 meals a day. I've already got 2 offers on the house. We'll use the money to pay for your care here." I looked him dead in the eye. "A nurse here has your mother's ring, David. She stole it." David didn't even blink. He just shook his head. "Dad, this is exactly why you're here. Mom was buried with her ring. You're hallucinating. The doctor says it's sundowning. It's very common." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Ohio winter. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was gaslighting me into a grave. He wanted me to doubt my own eyes. "What about Buddy?" I asked, my voice a whisper. David looked at his nails. "Dad, the shelter said he was too old for adoption, Dad. They did the humane thing. It was for the best." The room went silent. The air seemed to leave my lungs. Buddy was gone. My house was gone. My wife's ring was on the hand of a thief. I looked at David, and I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a predator. He stood up to leave, patting my shoulder. "Try to get some rest, Raymond. I'll check in next week." As he walked out, I didn't cry. The grief was too deep for tears. It had turned into something else, a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I waited until the night shift took over. Then I stood up and walked to the communal activities room. I needed a tool.
The activities room was filled with broken dreams, half-finished puzzles with missing pieces, and decks of cards so worn you couldn't tell the suits. I wasn't looking for games. I went to the old upright piano in the corner. It was out of tune, several keys stuck. I reached behind the backboard, feeling around until my fingers found what I was looking for, the long, thin metal tuning pin that had fallen out months ago. It was heavy and pointed. I tucked it into the sleeve of my gown. I also found a small, discarded transistor radio in the trash bin. It was broken, but the copper wiring inside was exactly what I needed. I returned to my room and waited. At 2 a.m., the nurse with Martha's ring came in to do her rounds. Her name tag said Brenda. She was humming to herself, her eyes bored as she checked my vitals. She didn't notice me watching her every move. When she reached for my arm to check my pulse, the ring caught the light. I saw the MC to RC clearly. My blood boiled, but I kept my face slack, playing the part of the broken old man. "Water," I rasped. "Please, so thirsty." She sighed, annoyed. "I'll be right back, Raymond. Don't go anywhere." She left the room, leaving her cart in the hallway for just a second too long. I moved faster than a man my age should be able to. I stepped into the hall and grabbed her clipboard. I flipped through the pages until I found my file. There it was, the DNR, a Do Not Resuscitate order. But the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was a crude forgery of my handwriting, likely done by David. He didn't just want my house. He wanted me to die quietly so the care costs wouldn't eat into his inheritance. I heard her footsteps returning and slipped back into my bed just as she entered with a plastic cup of lukewarm water. "Here you go, honey," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I took the cup, my hand shaking, not from age, but from the sheer effort of not wrapping my fingers around her throat. As she left, I felt the tuning pin in my sleeve. I wasn't just an old man. I was a soldier, and I was behind enemy lines. I spent the rest of the night using the copper wire from the radio to bypass the lock on my window. It was a simple circuit, something I'd learned in trade school 50 years ago. I had one shot at this. The window creaked as I slid it open, the freezing air rushing in like a long-lost friend. I was 3 stories up. There was a fire escape, but it was rusted and looked ready to collapse. I didn't care. I climbed out, the metal biting into my bare feet. I descended slowly, every joint screaming, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached the ground and sprinted, or as close to a sprint as I could manage, toward the tree line. I knew where I was. I was only 5 miles from the old AC Delco plant. I knew the woods behind it like the back of my hand. I walked for 3 hours, my blue gown fluttering in the wind. I found an old maintenance shack near the tracks that I knew hadn't been used in years. Inside, I found an old pair of coveralls and a heavy work jacket. I put them on, the familiar smell of grease and metal soothing my nerves. I sat on the floor, shivering, and pulled the tuning pin from my pocket. I had to get to the one person who could help me, an old friend named Miller who worked the night shift at the city records office. He owed me a favor from the time I saved his job back in '84. But as I stood up to leave, the door to the shack swung open. I raised the tuning pin, ready to fight, but stopped. It was a young man, maybe 25, with a backpack and a worn-out coat. He looked as scared as I was. "Whoa, take it easy, Pop," he said, raising his hands. I'm just looking for a place to sleep." I lowered the pen. "I don't have anything for you." He looked at my bare, bruised feet and then at my face. "You're that guy from the news, aren't you? The missing senior with dementia?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of my own face. David had already reported me missing, framing it as a tragic wandering episode. I realized then that David wasn't just looking for me, he was setting the stage for my accidental death. "You have to help me," I told the boy. "I'm not crazy. My son is trying to kill me." The boy looked at me for a long time, then he nodded. "My name's Leo. My grandpa was a vet too. He died in a place like the one you just left. Let's go." Leo had an old beat-up Honda. He drove me to Miller's house instead of the records office. Miller was shocked to see me, a ghost in grease-stained coveralls. We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him everything. The ring, the forged DNR, the bank account. Miller's face went grim. "Raymond, I can get you into the system. I can show you what David's been doing. But we have to be fast. He's already filed for a death certificate in absentia, claiming you fell into the river." We went to the records office under the cover of darkness. Miller bypassed the security, and we sat in the glow of the monitors. He started pulling up David's accounts. My eyes widened. David wasn't just stealing from me, he was laundering money through the Willows. He had a whole network of elderly clients whose assets were being drained into a shell company. And then Miller found it, the most damning piece of all. David had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me 3 months ago. The DNR was the final piece of his puzzle. "We have to go to the police," Leo said, his voice shaking. But I shook my head. "The police will just take me back to the home. David has the paperwork. We need something more." I remembered the footlocker, the tapes. I hadn't just sent letters to Martha. I'd recorded David when he was a teenager, bragging about a small theft he'd committed, a tape I'd kept to teach him a lesson he never learned. But more importantly, I had a recording from the day he brought those papers to my house. I'd hit the record button on the old Vietnam-era machine when he wasn't looking. I'd forgotten it was in my pocket during the struggle. We drove back to my house. It was surrounded by yellow tape. I slipped through the back, Leo following close behind. I found the footlocker in the basement, hidden under a pile of old rags. I pulled out the tape and played it. David's voice came through, clear and cold. "Sign the papers or I let the bank take it all. I'll make sure you never wake up from your next episode, Dad." It was all there, the threat, the intent, the malice. Just as I tucked the tape into my pocket, the front door crashed open. "I knew you'd come back here, David." David's voice boomed from the stairs. He wasn't alone. He had the 2 orderlies from the home with him. David stepped into the basement, a flashlight cutting through the dark. He looked at me with a sneer. "Give me the tape, Dad. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." I stood tall, my back straight, the way I used to stand at inspection. "You killed Buddy," I said, my voice steady. David laughed. "It was just a dog, just like you're just an old man. No one cares what you have to say." He motioned to the orderlies. "Take him. Make it look like a struggle. He attacked you, and you had to defend yourselves." As they stepped forward, the basement was suddenly flooded with light, not from flashlights, but from heavy-duty police lanterns. "Drop the weapons, hands in the air." Leo had stayed outside and called the one person I knew would listen, the young security guard from the VA, whose father had served in my unit. He had brought the state police. They swarmed the basement, pinning the orderlies to the floor. David tried to run, but he tripped over my old toolbox, the very one I'd used to build his childhood bike. He fell hard, face first into the concrete. The police took the tape. They took the forged DNR. They even found Brenda, the nurse, and recovered Martha's ring. As they led David away in handcuffs, he looked at me, his face bruised and desperate. "Dad, please, I'm your son." I walked up to him, my face inches from his. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a deep, hollow pity. I reached out and took his hand,
pressing Martha's ring into his palm. "I'm not your father anymore, David. I'm just a man who survived." Months later, I sat on my porch. The house was mine again, the for sale sign long gone. The power was on, and the garden was blooming. I wasn't alone. A small, scruffy terrier from the local shelter, the one Leo had helped me pick out, sat at my feet. He wasn't Buddy, but he had the same kind eyes. I looked at the ring on my finger, back where it belonged. I had lost a lot, but I'd kept the one thing David couldn't understand: my dignity. They said I was just an old man, but they forgot one thing. An old tool, if it's made of good steel, never truly breaks. It just waits for the right hand to pick it up again.